From childhood on, we are barraged with messages that to grow older is a sad thing, that it means decline, decay, and illness. Society is also full of ageist myths and beliefs that impact our health and our well-being. So join me for today's episode where I talk to Ashton Applewhite about how these stereotypes impact both our brains and our bodies. We hope you'll join our crusade to change the way you see the rest of your life. Welcome back to This is Getting Old, Moving Towards an Age-Friendly World. I'm Dr. Melissa Batchelor, and I am a nurse practitioner, and I wear a lot of different hats in my work, including hosting this weekly podcast to bring you news and information on aging, caring for someone living with Alzheimer's disease, and a wide range of topics that I hope will help move us towards becoming an age-friendly world. Because when things are age-friendly, they are friendly for everyone. So if you like the podcast, the best way to help me grow and support the podcast is to like it, share it, and leave a review in whatever platform you've tuned in on today. Because no matter how old you are today, we are all aging, and these issues are going to become increasingly important. If you're a millennial, there are things that need to be in place when you reach the age of 65. So we have about 20 to 25 years to get these things in place to help you age with the support and choices that will help you, just like the people that are 65 today. Your likes, shares, and reviews help get the information out to help more people dealing with these issues. But right now, let's get going on this week's episode. So welcome back to This is Getting Old. Today, we're going to be talking about how this chair rocks, a manifesto against ageism. And I'm joined by Ashton Applewhite, which I'm super excited about. So welcome, Ashton.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And so this is actually a book that you wrote. You have a TED Talk. You're doing a lot of amazing work. So before we get started, maybe just briefly introduce yourself for people that haven't heard of you yet.
My name, believe it or not, is Ashton Applewhite. I just learned I'm not the only person with that name. There's one other person, but I'm easy to find. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I write and speak and think about age bias, and which was catalyzed by the fact that I was getting older and looked in the mirror one day and went, oh, this thing, it's happening to me too. Imagine that. I think there's that moment for all of us. And what started as a blog with no readers except me has turned into a career as a public person on this issue, which is not what I envisioned. I had no idea, but I'm happy to be doing it. It's incredibly interesting, and it's, I think, important work in a world of longer lives.
Right. And I couldn't agree with you more. So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned a little bit about how you got interested in ageism, but what were some of kind of the early things that led you to realize, like from my perspective, we're all aging. And so if I want the world to look better when I get there, I probably should be doing that work sooner rather than later. But for someone who's kind of, tell us a little bit about how you kind of got interested in this topic.
Yeah, I mean, it was that it started because I realized that it was happening to me. That is true. But the more, we are all aging. We are aging from the minute we're born. It's not just something sad that old people do. Ageism, we're being ageist anytime we make an assumption about anyone or a group of people based on how old we think they are, including you're too young. Younger people experience ageism also, although we live in such a youth-obsessed society that older people bear the brunt. I have long been self-employed, and so there wasn't some moment at which I went, oh, crap, I'm not getting in the door or getting that drink at the bar. Maybe I didn't get the drink at the bar, but I'm such a sort of thick-skinned clod that I probably just pounded on the bar until the bartender brought me a drink. So it was there wasn't some specific moment where I myself felt age discrimination, but I became aware of how negative my attitudes towards aging were. I started to research longevity and talk to older people, and realized in a matter of months, if not weeks, how much of what I thought I knew about what it was like to be really old, in other words, the age that I am rapidly approaching now, how much was not nuanced enough, or way off base, or flat out wrong. So I became obsessed with why, with evidence all around us of older people being in the world in all kinds of interesting ways, we were also brainwashed into thinking it was just this, horrible downward slope into, diapers, decrepitude, and death.
Right. And so, right. And we see it in a lot of different ways in our society, from, birthday cards. I think the birthday card industry, like a lot of my friends are turning 50 this year. I've actually been really proud of them. Only 2 have had like the over the hill, like age equals decline birthday. Most of them are like embracing the fact that they're 50. But
you think knowing you had something to do with that?
Well, you'd like to think so.
Yeah, I bet it did.
But I think also society's changing a little bit too. I think the boomers are, because there was something, I was talking to somebody the other day, and actually when I first started teaching, which has now been like 20 years ago, in like one of my first classes trying to engage students, I was like, let's think about when your grandparents were 50. I mean, they looked like they were 80 compared to like, I go out now with my mom.
That's ageist.
Well, but the way they dressed, it made them appear older compared to like going out with my mom and people thinking that my kids are her kids. And I'm like, hey, there's another generation here in the middle, but people do, are looking more
different. It has changed. We look and move, if we are lucky, differently than people our age did, certainly 100 years ago. Yeah, it's a different landscape. And I think it's absolutely the case that ageism is out there in many, many more conversations and headlines and articles than was the case even a year ago. I know the culture is changing, which is exciting.
Right. And so actually last Thursday, I think it was last Thursday, I was on Good Morning Washington talking about, it was Ageism Awareness Day, Saturday, October 7th, and was on that morning show talking about The Golden Bachelor. And, that is a show that is, it's got people talking for sure. And it's interesting to watch, to read the comments and things that people are saying, but that kind of gets on that in your book. One of your topics is around kind of, sex and intimacy in older age and how we perceive that.
I mean, there's certain aspects of, gender roles that are not exactly hugely progressive with that show. I can't wait to see what it's like when the gender tables are turned and it's a whole bunch of guys competing for the attention of one woman. But basically, representation is really, really important. And we don't see enough older people, certainly nowhere close to representation in terms of how our percentage of the population, right? Not in the media, not in movies, not in television, and certainly not in presenting us as sexual beings and as romance as something that, you don't age out of being romantic, wanting to be romantic, if that's important to you, right? So I'm all in favor, of that being out there. And I like the way age is part of the Batchelor conversation, hearing aids, Medicare, Social Security. They are all at clearly one end of the spectrum in terms of youthful appearance and physical fitness and so on, but they're out there and they're not pretending they're 12. And I think that is great.
Right. And so I agree with that. And then getting back to kind of representation in movies and television, I mean, when you look at the top box office, the actors in Hollywood that are bringing in the most money, they're all over 50, except for I think one. But, Tom Hanks, Denzel Washington, Tom Cruise, like,
Ford.
Harrison Ford. Right. Now they all are men. So, kind of gets at the intersection of ageism and sexism. And you had mentioned in your book about Anne Hathaway and her response to not getting, roles. But there was one thing I
think she was in her late 20s or early 30s. And for all I know, listen, I said a lot of things that I wouldn't say 10 years later. So for all I know, she's changed her position. And also journalists catch you saying things that you wish you hadn't said. So I don't mean to come down super hard on Anne Hathaway, but what she said was, even though she was still in her, I believe her 20s, or certainly no older than her early 30s, hey, Ageism benefited me. In other words, a youth-centric culture in Hollywood benefited me, and now I've aged out of it, and that's the way it is, which is not an attitude that will ever help change the culture. And I do feel strongly that we women need to support each other at all ages, especially have more older and younger friends, and try and push back where we can. I mean, there's always so much brouhaha around celebrities and who's had work done. I cannot imagine the pressures on operating in that world where your appearance really is your stock in trade. So I do not judge anyone in my social circle either for having work done, for dyeing your hair. There's so many voices out there telling women what we should and shouldn't do, and should and shouldn't wear, and should and shouldn't look like. Right. And I'm not one of them, but we are all going to, until we join forces and call out the sort of larger forces that say, first of all, that our value in society is completely tethered to A, our looks, and B, our reproductive capacity, we're not going to achieve any kind of equity and liberation for women of all ages. Sorry, that was a bit of a tear. But
no, I mean, so I agree
strongly about.
Yeah, no, and actually what I was thinking about is, that probably was her thought and her thinking at that point in age, and the point of getting older is you have time to think and to grow and maybe change your mind, because the other like that has happened to other actresses in Hollywood. And I think Reese Witherspoon was like, roles for women over a certain age are drying up, so I'm going to start a production company because I don't accept the status quo. And so I do think that actually what this points out to me, it's not so much about what somebody said, it's about the attitude when you experience it, what you do with it. Do you just accept it, or do you say, no, this isn't right, and so here's what I'm going to do about it?
And I think it's important to point out that we're not always in a position to speak out. I learned this in a very sharp way that stuck with me. I was giving a talk in Beverly Hills was just a female audience, and the organizers were talking about how to handle the Q&A. And I said brightly, well, we could have everyone who stands up and asks a question say how old they are. And she said, honey, this is Beverly Hills. We would need ambulances outside, which was a sign of how tone deaf I was to the culture. And at that talk, I was a little preachier about dyeing hair in particular, and saying more like, we should do this because it's important for us all. And a woman came up to me, she was kind enough to do it in private, but she said, you don't get it. She said, if I didn't dye my hair, my boss would figure out how old I am, and I have children to support, and I can't afford to lose that job. So it's important but for those of us who are self-employed, for example, we need to, as you say, we need to speak out where we can in order to change the culture a little bit. I'm guessing, and please correct me, that in the past, when you have gotten birthday cards that say, you're over the hill, or black balloons or whatever, you have where you felt comfortable saying, this doesn't reflect how I feel, or whatever you said. And every little tiny comment we make helps change the culture. There's no gesture that is too small, and it's never too late. I'm sure you've changed the way your friends think about this.
Would you like to increase visibility for a product or service you've developed for older adults or their families? Or maybe you'd like to drive more traffic to your website by advertising to your target demographic. If so, I want to let you know about a new opportunity to advertise on This Is Getting Old, Moving Towards an Age-Friendly World, which is a top 10% globally ranked podcast, to get the word out about your product or service. You can learn more by visiting my website at MelissaBPhD.com, and I look forward to working with you. Well, and I do think I can tell you, I've probably bought ageist birthday cards.
We all did.
And didn't really think that much about it. But, it kind of gets back to this one question about, why does ageism matter? And what you just described was a person who is changing the way they look to hide their age so that they can pass for someone that's younger. And, but what are some of the, I know this, but I'm going to ask you the question. Like, what are some of the health impacts that ageism has when we accept it as a society?
I love that question. Because regardless of whether you are, terrified of getting older or embracing it, or like most of us, somewhere in between, regardless if whether from a structural point of view, you think population aging is this fantastic opportunity or this disaster, the proverbial gray tsunami. No one wants older people to be sick and cost money. And there is an awful lot about aging that we cannot control, no matter how wealthy or fortunate we happen to be. You might get sick, right? Your partner might die. We can't control, and the less economic privilege we have, the less control we have, the less access to good healthcare and so on. However, one thing we can control is our attitudes. And there is a growing body of fascinating evidence that shows how attitudes towards aging affect how our minds and bodies function at the cellular level. People with more positive attitudes towards aging, I prefer to say people with more accurate attitudes towards aging, because we need to accept that there's scary stuff. We need to, we can't paper over the challenges, but people who just learn about aging, because our fears are so out of proportion to reality. People with more informed and accurate understanding of aging are my favorite study, and most of the work is done by this fantastic scientist, very reputable, named Becca Levy at Yale. Was that people with these more fact-based attitudes are less likely to get Alzheimer's, even if they have the gene that predisposes them to the disease. A more recent study of hers shows that these more accurate attitudes can reverse. She's a very careful scientist. She wouldn't use reverse unless the data was ironclad. Can reverse mild cognitive decline. This is why, and also there's more and more data coming from other sources about how having negative assumptions about aging, just assuming it's all going to go to hell, or every time something hurts, it's because of your age and it won't get better, that it leads to worse health, mental health, depression, heart disease, a whole four different quadrants of overall health are negatively affected by what they call everyday ageism. This is why there are more and more global anti-ageism campaigns all the time. One just launched this last fall. The leader in there are a couple contenders, but the World Health Organization launched a global campaign to combat ageism. That's the name of it.
Yep.
And it's not the World Old People Organization, right? But they realize that the biggest obstacle to increasing health span, along with lifespan, is not clean water, it's not more vaccines, it's age bias.
Right.
So if you really want to increase your attitudes of staying healthy longer, educate yourself about aging.
Right. And what that gets to, the geriatrician I used to work for, she always called it stinking thinking. And it actually makes sense when you have stinking thinking, when you're like, everything's negative, that you kind of, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So
self-fulfilling prophecies. Yeah. I mean, I live in New York and read the New York Times, and there's a medical columnist, Lisa Sanders, every couple of weeks, and there's a mystery diagnosis, and it's almost like some obscure autoimmune thing. But this young guy felt aches and pains, et cetera, and the punchline was they did figure it out in time. He did live, but he ignored the symptoms for quite a while because he said he was only in his 30s. My point is that this can harm you starting really young. And he said, well, this must be just part of getting older. He dismissed the symptoms, and it almost cost him his life because he thought, everything's going to go to hell, and it's just starting a little sooner than I thought.
Right. So I'm actually reading another book now called Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. And, that our thought patterns, do matter. They do impact our brain, and so I'm actually doing an upcoming series on brain health around kind of thinking, and have done, several podcasts about normal aging to help educate people. Because I think sometimes as scientists, we tend to think our peer-reviewed journal articles are being read by the public. And it's like,
we need to get that science out there in more palatable, more digestible form.
Yeah. So I wanted to bring up another thing. And I think maybe just because celebrities have the platform is that we hear celebrities saying this, but I've also heard a lot of people in my own life say the exact same thing. But Arnold Schwarzenegger was talking about like the changes he's seeing in his body, as he ages. And he ended this little clip saying, he's like, it sucks. And in your book, you make this point that, you know what, but being 13 sucked. I mean, things can suck at any time, but you're right. Like,
I mean, listen, there are only two universal, inevitable bad things about getting older. One is that people you've known all your life are going to die. And the other is that your body is going to work less well. And that does suck, but and no one, I mean, for me, it's mainly my bones. I have arthritis, and neither my ears nor my eyes work as well as they used to. I mean, I have a brand new shoulder transplant. I've had my cataract fixed, so my vision is a lot better than it was when I was 13. Actually, I just use these for near vision. So it's complicated. But I think 2 points here. One is that, everything else in my body works great. Someone else might have a heart problem or a liver problem, but be able to play tennis until they're 103. Not everything falls apart at the same time. It's highly variable. If I played tennis, I would be really sad about my shoulder. I don't play tennis. I can do everything I need to do. So what affects, the loss of some things affect us depending on what we do, and our self-esteem is another thing that makes it variable. But the bottom line is that we age well, not by pretending that these things are never going to happen to us, but by adapting, as Schwarzenegger has done. He doesn't lift Volkswagens anymore, but he's forged a really interesting career.
Right. And I think the things that you made me just think about is, going back to the death part, death happens to anybody. I mean, I just had a friend pass away, or somebody that I knew back in my 20s. She was in her mid-50s. I'd lost touch with her for a while, but she died of colon cancer last week. And I'm like, so I think that brings up the importance of having intergenerational friends, because if you only have older, like literally in order for all of your friends to die, you only have to have people like, you'd only have to have old friends, which means you're missing out on a lot of life, by having friends of all ages.
No kidding. And ideally, of course, of all genders, of different backgrounds, from different countries. The more diverse our environment in work and at home, the bigger a world we inhabit, even if it's just vicarious or just through conversation. It's also really important politically. I mean, making a significantly older or younger friend is itself an anti-ageist act, just like making a friend with whose skin color is different from yours is an anti-racist act, right? It enlarges your world. And, it's not easy. I mean, my friend group, I'm so uncomfortable saying this, it's hard for me to say it, is still almost entirely white. I'm working on it. If it were easy, it would be the Rainbow Coalition, but it's very age diverse because I've been at it for longer. But I know it's not easy. So here's a little tip. Think of something you like to do and find a mixed age group to do it with. Maybe mahjong. My sister's learning mahjong, or singing, or some kind of community organizing. And then that way you'll meet people in a way that's not artificial, right? You're all engaged in something. You may like that person, you may not like them, but you're not going to like or dislike them because of the age gap. And another small suggestion is to try and break the habit, which we all have, no judgment, of making a beeline for people our own age when we come in a room. Mm-hmm. Go talk to someone who's older or younger.
Right. And then going back to what you were talking about with, we've had a couple of healthcare mentions here. I mean, the good news is we do have technology and medical advances to help us as, things happen. So that's one piece. Like if your hearing is bad, we have different hearing aids and different technologies and things, but there's a lot of ageism in healthcare also.
They're so great.
Right. So
I had an acoustic neuroma. It's a benign brain tumor, but unfortunately it shows up on the right, where your ear canal, your nerve, auditory nerve comes and your brain come together. So it compresses the auditory nerve. So you go deaf. So I have a hearing aid and my bum ear transmits the sound that comes into this ear to the hearing aid. It's not as good as not being deaf in one ear. You know, I don't love it, but I love my hearing aids and it helps.
Right. And that protects your brains as well.
Yes.
But going back to the guy, being in his 30s, not seeking healthcare because of his age, it's the same thing. One example I've heard before is like, you go to the doctor because your right knee hurts. And if the doctor says, well, it's just because of your age, like that's what you get back from a healthcare provider to say, well, that's funny because my other knee's the same age and it doesn't hurt.
Exactly. Exactly. It's an old joke. I used it in my TED talk. It's a wonderful joke. It's why there's a geriatrician called Mark Lax who wrote a book called Treat Me, Not My Age. Right. It's why I would like medical charts to have your age. Of course, your age is a very important component of your biology, and drugs work differently in older people, et cetera. We're more likely to be taking more meds, et cetera. But it should be on page 2. And it should be on page 2 of dating profiles too, honestly, so that someone can look at you and assess, get that impression without having all the assumptions that click into place for all of us, no judgment, the minute we have a number.
Yeah. Well, dating and ageism and dating websites is like a whole nother podcast in and of itself, and dating in your 50s is certainly different than it was in my 20s. But, and I think people just realizing they have a lot more control over if they are, looking at their diet to see, have they optimized their diet? Are they optimizing their sleep? Are they actually exercising? And then monitoring your thought life. Those are all different things that will help you age well and can help you pick up on your own ageist self-beliefs, because if you have negative ones, it can actually decrease your lifespan by an average of 7.5 years.
Yeah, and I will just say, as someone who does not like to exercise and doesn't want to, that dieting, paying attention to diet, those things are really hard. Reading a book is not so hard. To me, it's a much smaller ask. And I just want to mention a website called Old School, oldschool.info, which is a site I started with 2 colleagues, and it contains hundreds of, everything's free except the books, hundreds of carefully vetted resources to educate people about age bias, ageism, what it looks like, what it quacks like, what it walks like, from language guides to animations to books, podcasts, whatever media form you like, noodle around and listen up a little bit, and you will be increasing your chances of living both longer and healthier.
Right. And I think one of the points you make in your book is, it's really about raising awareness, because even my son yesterday, we were in the car and he was talking about somebody who was old, and I said, old. And I said, you mean older? He goes, well, older. And I'm like, well, how old is older? And he was like, well, they're like 50. I'm like, Davis, like, you do know that I'm 51. He goes, well, they weren't like, they were older than you.
But that was a great intervention and a beautiful example, because, you were asking him, when someone says, I feel old, what do you actually mean? What does the word old mean? And that's what you were saying. There was, what meaning are you attaching to that, Davis? And age is real. If your teenager looks at you and thinks you're ancient, we are ancient to a teenager. Age is real. It's not like any reference to age is problematic. The problem occurs when we attach a negative or positive value to the number.
Right. And so I said, well, you're just a younger. I picked up that term from you, the older or the younger. So, well, thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm sure we could talk for hours and hours.
Always can.
But just wanted to make a reference back to This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism. And if you're wondering if something is ageist, you have a great Q&A blog now called Yo, Is This Ageist?
I do.
And then what other ways could people get in touch with you to learn more? We've given them a couple of resources.
Well, if you remember the title of the book, or again, Google me, I'm easy to find. My main blog, where I have been thinking out loud about this, and of course that's all free, is thischairrocks.com. You can find Yo, Is This Ageist there. You can find my book. You can find, if it's, you can see there's a link to my regular blog, which is searchable by topic. And for, a vast range, and there's also a link to Old School, all the anti-ageism stuff, including Becca Levy's work, including that book by the geriatrician Mark Lax that I referenced. The idea was one-stop shopping. So my website is one among many resources that you have to turn to that are right there on the web.
All right. Well, I really appreciate it. And thank you for doing your part in raising awareness about ageism, and for being with me today to share your insights and your thought leadership. And I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your work too, Melissa.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. You can check out other episodes on this platform or visit my website at MelissaBPhD.com. Thanks to listeners like you, in the first 18 months of This Is Getting Old, we have reached a ranking of top 10% globally, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your support in making that happen. I'm also really excited to let you know that you can now work with me directly, either one-on-one, or you can join one of the groups that I coach. Particularly if you're an adult child dealing with an aging parent, or a caregiver trying to manage the complexities of someone living with Alzheimer's disease. In the show notes, you can also find information about how to reach out and contact me directly, and I hope to work with each of you very soon as we discover and share more ways to make the world more age-friendly for everyone. My website also has information about how to contact me for speaking engagements, or if you have someone you'd like to recommend as a show guest for This Is Getting Old. If you have a product or service in the aging space that you would like to advertise and or sponsor an episode, there's more information about that on my website. And you can also find books and courses that I developed and learn more about the products and services that I recommend. So don't forget, if you like the podcast, the best way to help me grow and support it is to like it, share it, and leave a review in whatever platform that you've tuned in on today. Your likes, shares, and reviews help increase my rating and my rankings, and also help other people find the podcast. I look forward to reading your reviews and hearing from you.